Hey guys, it's Tyson Popplestone here and welcome back to another episode of Intention. Pumped that you came by, really excited to have you guys here and even more excited to introduce you to my guest today, possibly one of the best voices for radio in the world. Brooke McAlary is the creator of slowyourhome.com. She started a blog a few years ago, journaling her way towards a more simple life. She went through a really difficult battle with depression after her first child was born, and her doctor told her that she really needed to start simplifying the way that she operated. So without any idea of what that really meant and how to create a more simple life, she went to Google, as we do, and started Googling how it was that she could start living more simply. What started out as something just to impact her life became a journaling process through her blog, which gradually picked up traction with people all around the world. Her blog grew and grew for the next few years until about 18 months ago, she ended the blog and focused more on a new venture, her podcast that she created and is now hosting full-time, called the Slow Home Podcast. So I've been a massive fan of Brooke for the last couple of years since I've started taking interest in what it means to live a more intentional lifestyle, and got a whole heap of just great nuggets of wisdom from her story. So I've got absolutely no doubt that you guys will get that as well. Now, quick heads up, when Brooke agreed to do this interview, she was in Sydney, I was in London. When she told me that 11:30 a.m. her time would work, I was so excited that I didn't even think to check the London time. So I locked it in, and it turned out that 1:30 a.m. London time was 11:30 a.m. Sydney time. So if my voice sounds a little bit sexy for the first 10 minutes of this interview, it's purely because it's so early in the morning and I'd had a couple of hours sleep before I got up to do the interview. So bear with that. But guys, really excited to introduce you to Brooke. Make sure you check out the show notes that I have at tysonpopplestone.com for any links that you might want to see more of Brooke's work. So sit back, relax. This is Brooke McAlary. Enjoy.
I'm the soul challenger, I'm the road damager. Now behold the cold and the straight magical. Cause the sky brings flowers and the strong grow weary. The heroes spill blood in a blast and a fury. Pray on the power and pray to your father. Cause all of the quakes in the universe resonate to your heartbeat and your faith.
I'm into so much of what it is that you put out there. I've read your blog and I've listened to your podcast, and I still do as much of both of those as I can. Well, not so much your blog anymore. But when you're asked what is your job, can you teach me how to answer that question? But what do you do for work?
I always struggle, to be honest, to say that, to have an answer that people go, oh, okay, great, moving on. Because, if I say I'm a podcaster or I'm a writer, then people will either say, what's a podcast? Or they'll say something like, oh, like cereal. Yeah, kind of. Or if they say, oh, I'm a writer, oh, what do you write? Do you write, and they expect fiction books or something like that. And it'll be easier when my book's released, I suppose, so I can say I've actually written a book. Yeah. But honestly, I just tell people I work online, and and I talk about slow living, and I do presentations and that kind of stuff about slow living, and then people either don't care or they want to know more.
Rewind the clock for us, Brooke. When did this all get started?
The slow living kind of piece of what I do?
Yeah.
I would take it back about 6 or 7 years. I was very overwhelmed in life in general. We had just moved to the mountains from the city, and I was running my own business. It was a jewelry label. We had a baby, and life was just really hectic. I'd put huge amounts of pressure on myself to just be everything to everyone in all facets of life. Yeah. And I found myself really struggling significantly, just emotionally. And I was pregnant with our second child, renovating, doing all these things. And I had a moment where I realized I couldn't do it anymore. So I closed my business down. And I wish that I could say that was like my entry point into living more intentionally. But what I did is just replace all of the busyness of running a business with busyness of other kinds, and I found myself really struggling through the last months of my second pregnancy. And then when our son was born, I was diagnosed about 6 weeks after he was born with really severe post-natal depression. Wow. I was in like a terrible mental place, awful, man. Just, really dark. And I ended up, thankfully, being able to talk to Ben about it, and he got me straight into a doctor, and I was seeing, a psychiatrist and a psychologist within the week. And as a part of that process, my psychiatrist was listening to me one day talking about how overwhelmed I was and how stressed and anxious and really just struggling I was with everything. And she just kind of paused and asked me, have you ever thought about simplifying your life or, doing a bit less? And I was really offended because I'm like, do you mean I can't cope? What are you saying?
Yeah.
And it stuck with me, though. I found myself kind of thinking about it for a few days, and I Googled, how do I simplify my life? Found Leah Babauta's blog and discovered that there was a whole heap of people who were trying to say no to, life lived at 110% and get really intentional with their lives. And part of Leah Babauta's blog was about minimalism, so it was simplifying our physical environment. And, I could see that there was potential for that to bleed into other areas of life, but I couldn't cope with that at the time. So I just started decluttering. And, a couple of years later, we'd decluttered tens of thousands of things from our house, and that was sort of the beginning. Then I started writing about it and realising that there were more people who wanted to know about it and get help and, get a bit of insight into what it actually looks like to start living that kind of way.
Wow. And how did the changes in the way that you were living with the simplifying, the way you were operating, have an impact on your headspace? Did it help your depression at all?
Oh, yeah, it did. Absolutely. Seeing a psychiatrist, and I was on antidepressants for years to help recover from the depression, which obviously was a lifesaver for me. But the physical decluttering surprised me, actually, with the amount of mental clarity I got as a result of going through the process and starting to question what was important and probably more significantly, what wasn't important. And it turns out that heaps of stuff wasn't important. So letting go of that allowed me to help to start figuring out my priorities and living much more in accordance with those. And it's just been this continual, gradual process of clarifying and evolving and iterating and adding different strategies and practices into my life. So now I really feel like I've shifted into mindful living and, really deliberate kind of choices in life. But that only became possible for me because I went through the process of physical decluttering as well.
Wow. And is this where the blog actually got started? So originally, for those listening, you wrote an amazing blog, which is sort of on the back burners now, apart from the weekly updates that you're doing with your show notes and things like that. An incredible blog, a really inspiring blog. Is that the foundations to where that got started?
Yeah, I had a silly little blog before that, which it's so embarrassing. I think it still exists somewhere online.
I'm going to find it.
Oh, please do. And it, I think I was drawn to the idea of writing about more sustainable living and maybe kind of chronicling a few of the changes that we were making in terms of just greener living. Having kids really started me thinking about like chemicals and toxins and that kind of stuff. And I don't think that's unusual. Mm-hmm. So I started writing about how I was using natural things to clean the house and that kind of stuff. But honestly, it's not that interesting to me. Like I made the change and that was it. But that sort of inspired me to start writing. I've always been a writer, but it's mostly been just for myself. I hadn't done much writing in public before. And that little funny blog kind of, stoked the fire enough for me to think about writing the thing that was really sort of I was very passionate about at the time, which was this process of simplifying and slowing down. So I ended up canning the first silly little blog and starting Slow Home. And it was quite quickly that people began to respond to it. And that's when I realised that there was a lot of people with really similar struggles and similar, they're in similar positions. Even if the circumstance didn't look exactly the same, it was, there was enough of a common point there for people to really resonate with what we were going through and, want to know more. So that then, I guess, brought me about. I was posting maybe once a day for quite a while there, and I really wrote significant amounts about the process of simplifying and decluttering and what I was discovering myself as we went along. And, that was, I think the blog itself is, it might have just gone over 5 years, 4 or 5 years old. Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting. I was actually going to ask you what the sort of turnaround time was, because as someone who started a blog earlier this year, I'm really interested in picking up little tips and tricks, and I'm always fascinated. I read a lot of your stuff, and I was one of those people who was right on board with the things that you were saying, and it's so nice actually to get the chance to speak to you, because my wife and I both feel as though what you guys do, both you as an individual and you and your husband as a team, whether it's through your words or your podcast, or you guys just having a little bit of fun together, we both feel not only inspired, but like you guys are giving us the tools to make really positive changes in our life. And it's so cool. I think that's why I'm so excited, and was so excited to have a chance to chat to you, because it's like, it's amazing, I guess, the amount of people you're probably influencing from a distance that you never even met or had the chance to speak to. And up until now, I certainly put myself in that category. But what was the kind of turnaround time with you starting to post more and more? I didn't realise that you were posting daily, starting to post more and more, and people sort of discovering your blog and getting in touch to say they love your stuff.
Yeah, I think it was when I stopped just posting purely how-to kind of stuff, and started to put a bit of myself and my humour and my personality into my writing. And also when it's to be perfectly honest, I think it's when you start to get vulnerable with people, that people really connect. And not every post of mine was like that at all. People still really wanted the practical strategies and ways to cope with certain problems, and I was more than happy to write those. But when it was peppered with these sort of insights into where I was at, and particularly where I was struggling, I think that really resonated. And I think there's a fine line between being kind of open and honest and either oversharing or, coming off like a hot mess. Like there's a real sort of fine line between those things. But the other side of it is connecting with people as a human, and I think when I started to receive lots and lots of emails from people, really, deep personal emails, it kind of became clear to me that it had hit a different sort of level of connection with people, which I think is, and that was, probably a year to 18 months in, I really felt like I started to find my voice with my writing, and people started to hear my voice in my writing. And from that point, I'd started to pick up a little bit of attention from other bloggers. Like Joshua Becker was a big, advocate for my first sort of couple of years of writing, and he really helped put me out to people who I probably otherwise wouldn't have reached. His audience was just massive and still is. And Courtney Carver and a few other people like that. And I think once you start to build your network of like-minded people too, that's also really helpful.
That's really interesting. I've heard you speak about Joshua Becker posting one of your blogs, or what was it, giving you the space to write a guest post for his page, and the amount of people that came to you as a result of that was just huge. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. So he had highlighted my blog. He used to do, I'm not sure if he still does it actually, like 5 blogs to watch this year, or 5 people doing good things in the simplicity sort of space. And my blog was fortunate enough to be on one of those lists. And his audience was maybe 20, 50 times as big as mine at the time. So that sort of put me on his radar, and as a result, I just emailed him and said thank you. And he asked me a while after that if I'd be interested in writing a guest post. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And that was for years the biggest referral point of traffic to my blog was from becoming minimalist.
That's amazing. That must have been an exciting moment for you to get the word out there a little bit more about what it is that you're up to.
Yeah, it was. It really was. I remember I was kind of floating around on cloud nine. And, you know, the interesting thing is it's just you don't know where those connections are going to come from and what's going to resonate with people. And I think what it taught me was you just try, you know, you just say yes and kind of be willing to share and network and kind of join in that community, and a lot comes of it as a result.
So 7 years ago, you said you started making the changes to your own life. You started recording it. The blog gets out there. People start discovering it. They love what you're about. And over time, you start to come towards the podcast that you have now, Slow Your Home. What was the point that you decided that you're going to transition from writing these blogs that were already impacting such a big community to thinking, you know what, we're going to change it up a bit and start recording a podcast?
Yeah, it's really an interesting thing for me to have done, really. As someone who identifies as a person who loves writing, it was quite a dramatic shift, and it sort of happened pretty quickly. But I'm a big podcast listener myself. I just love listening to them. And I realized after listening to shows like Mark Maron and Nerdist and things like that, people who have these quite rich conversations with other people, and you start to really get a sense of them as a person, you know, the host in particular. I started to realize that I thought of these people as sort of kind of quasi-friends, and I felt like I really got to know them, and the connection was much deeper than if I sat and read a book of theirs or if I sat and read a blog. And I had been interviewed quite a few times for other people's podcasts, and surprisingly, because I don't love public speaking, I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the process of thinking about things differently. You know, when I talk about something, I think about it in a different way than when I write about something. And I said to Ben one night, I think I might consider starting a podcast. He's like, oh, cool, great. I said, the only problem is I can't edit myself. I can't listen to myself. It's just some kind of horrible torture to me to listen to my own voice, which I think, to be fair, is everyone's experience. But it was the biggest obstacle for me to starting. And he said, well, I'm happy to edit it for you. And then we kind of brainstormed a bit, and he decided that it would be fun for us to do the intros together, kind of co-host together. And it's just really sort of bloomed out of that first discussion, but the first few episodes are kind of pretty bad.
That is awesome. I disagree. I reckon your first few episodes are amazing. I've heard you say that before, and I think it was your 100th episode that you were celebrating. I can't remember, correct me if I'm wrong, and you went back to episode 1 where you guys sat down and he was sort of interviewing you about why it was you were starting what you were starting.
Yep, that's right.
And it is the coolest episode. And I reckon that's one thing I absolutely love about you two is you seem so, I don't know, there's so many things I could compliment you on in this department, but I reckon your relationship is like a point of inspiration for me as well. Because are you guys married?
Yeah, we're married. We've been married 10 years next April.
That's amazing. I reckon it's so inspiring to hear people who've been married for a little while now still sound like they really like each other.
You're the second person to say that to me this week, actually.
Oh, it's so cool. My wife and I actually, so as I mentioned before, we're in London at the moment, but before we got here, we had been travelling a little bit, and we were laying on a beach in Barcelona, both listening to one of your podcasts, and my wife was like, man, like, how refreshing is it to hear a couple that sound like they're actually friends and not just doing it because of the contract that they're signed. I was like, I know. So ever since then, every time I say I'm listening to Slow Home, my wife always laughs and she's like, babe, like, this is the kind of marriage we're going to have, yeah? I'm like, oh, babe, don't, like, we got it, haven't we? So you got a little bit of work to do. Listen to how relaxed he is. And she loves you guys. We both do. So I just wanted to give you a big shout out there. Actually, I'm going to get some marriage tips off you later because I reckon you're in a really good position to be able to offer them. But so he started editing these podcasts and they started producing it. And you obviously had a bit of a foundation. You had a good crew with your blog that you were posting to. But man, it's just taken off. Tell us about the journey with the podcast from there.
Yeah, I didn't expect it to take off the way it did, honestly. I've started quite a few projects and canned them pretty quickly after I've begun because they've been like I've not been passionate about them, and as a result, like the amount of work that I put into them kind of flags over time. And I didn't go into this with that expectation. I never do, but I'm kind of always open to listening to what my brain is saying, or, my motivation is saying about a project. So I didn't have many expectations at all. And that first week, I think we put out 3 or 4 episodes in the first week and then went back to weekly after that. And the numbers just went berserk. I honestly did not expect that at all. People usually are quite a hard sell to get from reading something to listening to something, particularly if they're not podcast listeners. And it was something that I guess resonated. I think it was also, to be fair, I think it was Ben and my kind of interplay that really interested people, because it wasn't just me sort of sitting there talking about slow living or a particular kind of topic. There was a lot of interaction, and I think people did enjoy that from the beginning. We were lucky enough to get featured on iTunes front page for a few months, and that brought a whole other raft of people in to listen. And it's just kind of been a consistent growth. We had 1 million downloads a few months ago, and we're kind of heading towards 1.5. Which honestly, thanks. It freaks me out a bit, to be honest. I try not to think about it, because I think, if you start to quantify that, it really is quite. It's not scary. They're all good people, and they're all kind of interested. No one's going to give an hour to something that they hate, but it's been a really interesting kind of journey, and to see how people react to us and connect with us, it's completely different to the way people connected with me when I was writing. People really do, like they view us as kind of friends or allies, or people, because people choose to spend a couple of hours a week with us sometimes, and that's a lot. People could be doing a lot of things with that time, and if they choose to listen to what we have to say about something, then that's something I don't want to ever kind of take for granted, and I don't want to waste people's time either. So it's but it's been brilliant. It's been unexpectedly a lot of fun.
It's amazing, those numbers that you're just telling me. It's kind of scary as well, the fact that I can understand what you do mean when you say it's a little bit scary. I mean, it is amazing, absolutely amazing, but it's just crazy that such a simple tool can have such a reach to so many people all around the world. And you said a lot of people are getting in touch with you now. I've actually heard you speak that, the crowd that is coming to your page now is a lot bigger, or even a lot different in some regards to what it was when it was just your blog. What are some of the big differences with the people that are getting in touch with you now, compared to what it was just through the blog?
That's a really good question. I think there's a few things. I think one area that Ben and I have been quite intentional in the last 6 months or so in just really concentrating on being ourselves as well, being as honest and open and like our quirky selves as possible. And I think that's like, and we talk about things that I know some people who are kind of interested in the umbrella ideas of slow living just won't be interested in. And that's perfectly fine. But I think we're really concentrating on, I guess, going about this in a really authentic sort of way, and not in like, authenticity is a real buzzword for people who are producing stuff, online, but we're actually doing it in just a genuine kind of way. And I think what we're finding is the people who get it really get it, and they really like hearing what we have to say about a certain thing, or they like, hearing our perspective. So for that, I think because of that, people's connection to us is different and deeper, and they do kind of view us as friends, which is such a, it's a real compliment to realize that. And I think then the other side of it is that people are more inclined to engage with us and chat on Facebook and leave comments on, social media and all of that, those kind of channels, probably for the same reason. They've started to view us as rounded, complete people rather than someone who just talks about a particular topic all the time. We're kind of giving an insight more into the other sides of us, which takes time. I think, honestly, it takes time. It's like finding your writing voice. You kind of got to find your speaking voice as well, and figuring out what the boundaries are on that for us, because, we've got kids and we want to make sure that we protect that side of our family life, because they haven't chosen to have parents who produce things for the public. So, we do kind of go about that quite mindfully as well.
That's so interesting. And one thing I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about is, it's funny and it can be ironic, I guess. You're right about slow living. You speak about slow living. Your whole, I guess, your job, I guess, for lack of a better word, is based around slow living. But how do you go with the fact that you speak about it and actually putting it into practice in your life? Because I've become really interested in minimalism and living a little more intentionally, living a life more in line with the things that I really value, and sort of letting go a little bit of the excess. And I put so much time into thinking about it and writing it and putting ideas out there. And I always tell people that for me, this is something that I write so much about and talk so much about because I need to hear it more than anybody else. Like, I need to be continually reminded, hey, slow down, enjoy it, just enjoy the ride. But I'll get so stressed about a blog post from time to time, or so stressed about a little bit of work from time to time. And people go, come on, Ty, it's like you're putting out this idea. How do you go with actually consistently sort of implementing this slow living way of life? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It does make sense. And we're kind of asked similar versions of that quite a bit, because what people will see, the things that we put out into like the public kind of facing world, and it's all about slow living and intentionality and being really deliberate with how we spend our time and all of those kinds of things. And then people will see that is kind of our output. And I think for me, really, the big piece is we're busy. I like being busy, to be perfectly honest. I enjoy having things on. I enjoy having projects that I'm working on. I enjoy always having something happening. But I'm also really, really happy to live slowly, if that makes sense. I don't think it's necessarily about pace. I think it's about choices and where we spend our time, and having that kind of light and shade. Like, when the kids are at school, Ben and I work really hard for, Monday to Friday, and there's occasional afternoons where we work or occasional evenings where we work. And we really focus on our output being as high as possible in that period, which then allows us to live a really slow, intentional kind of pace for the rest of our week and our weekends. And, we make sure we take time off whenever possible and whenever needed. So I think it's kind of this really strange duality, I guess, of working hard, which I have no problem with, and I don't think that it is, anti-slow or anti-intentional at all. I think if anything, it's probably more intentional, because we're doing that in order to afford us the time to slow down and be present and hang out with the kids and, take the weekends off and really relax and read and garden and do all those things that are kind of central to us living this sort of slower life. The interesting thing is, I think, about simple living is it's not particularly simple to get there. It's really not. There's a lot of head work. There's a lot of work to figure out what's a priority and what's important and what's significant enough to give our time to, and to learn strategies to say no, and all of those things take time and practice and energy. And I think it's sort of the irony of simple living is that getting there can be quite complicated if we allow it to, and it can certainly be overwhelming if we try and focus too far into the future. So I think that having priorities in place and really working towards aligning the way you live with those priorities helps a lot, because then the stuff that's on the peripheral, you can kind of much more easily let that fall to the wayside. Like, you can just let that go and not stress about it. So I think having your reasons or your why, I talk about a lot. If you've got your why and you understand why you're making these changes, it can be much easier to simplify and, focus on the bits that are important, because otherwise you can get just really, really overwhelmed with all the different facets of what simplicity or slow living or minimalism or sustainability or eco, like all of those things they all sort of come in under the same umbrella of living an intentional life. But if you allowed yourself to think too broadly too early, you can really get lost and overwhelmed. So that was quite a complicated answer, ironically.
It's so true that this whole simple living idea, it really does take form in so many different parts of your life. When I first started getting interested in it, I thought it was purely about the material possessions in our life, and then I started to realise just the vast amount of areas in my life that just pop up and become a topic of conversation. But one thing that I really struggle with, Brooke, or one thing that I'm really trying to work at is my physical surroundings now are great. Like I feel as though I've got control over that part of it, in terms of I don't necessarily accumulate, or I'm more conscious of what I accumulate, I guess I should say. I'm a lot more conscious of that, and my physical space feels better about it. But I think speaking about this podcast, or speaking about the blog that I'm writing, it becomes a real area of mental noise for me, and I love it when I'm doing it. I really love working on it. I love trying to improve it, but it's the switching off part that I really struggle with. For someone who's obviously, you've spoken a little more about, overcoming your depression and I guess dealing with a whole other form of mental noise. Like, is there any advice that you'd give to a person like me who has, okay, he's got the physical stuff a little more under control, but the mental noise, just the switching off when the work day's done and now it's time to spend time with your wife or with your family or your friends or whoever it is that you're with? How do I make that transition a little more confidently? Does that make sense?
It does, and it's a good question, and that's sort of the trajectory that my story has taken as well. Like I couldn't really deal with the emotional noise and the mental clutter initially because I was just so, like, I was really broken, when I first came to the idea of simplifying. But what I could control was my physical environment, and as a result started to slowly open up time and space and this sense of margin or buffer that was first of all physical. And then I started to realize that I didn't quite feel as overwhelmed mentally or emotionally. And then that just sort of afforded me the opportunity to start thinking about the different ways I could kind of open up that brain space a little bit more, and I started actually at the suggestion of my psychiatrist, just doing really simple mindfulness techniques like body scanning and just sitting quietly, even just for 30 seconds, because I had at the time, a baby and a toddler. It was a rare time that I could kind of just sit during the day and find any sort of pocket of quiet that was any longer than a minute or two. But she said that was enough, and it was enough to start finding that little tiny pocket of peace. So what I would do is just sit in a chair or sit wherever I was and just scan through each physical sensation that I was experiencing at the time. So I'd close my eyes and breathe really deeply and ask myself, what can I feel? I can feel the seat under my butt. I can feel the sun on my face. What can you hear? I can hear the dog barking. I can hear the chickens. I can hear a car. I can, what can you smell? What can you taste? And go through your senses. And she said it's not about what you're actually experiencing. It's about bringing yourself back into the present moment and into your body, and not up in your head and not up in those thoughts about work and deadlines and things that are happening in 2 weeks and things that happened 5 years ago. And, it brings you really very, very directly into the present moment. And that I found, it was quite interesting actually, because I didn't necessarily feel an immediate reaction to that either way. But over time, what I started to realize was that in and of itself was giving me that buffer, that mental kind of buffer or margin or breathing room that I had been lacking. And it was sort of similar moments then that I started to find reasons to do that in other areas. So I would be hanging the clothes out, and I'd walk past a plant in our garden when I was hanging the clothes out on the clothesline. And I would stop and I would just have a look at the plant. And it's such a simple thing to do, and it seems so insignificant. But if I spent 30 seconds looking at a flower or watching the bees buzzing or studying, the way the seedling was coming up through the soil, that was another way of finding those little tiny pockets. And over time, those pockets started to become more frequent. And I started to realize that it was actually incredibly valuable to my mental health. And only just this year I've started to meditate as a practice, I suppose. I've been practicing mindfulness techniques for quite a while, but meditation for me has been a massive game changer. And I don't think I would have had the tools to do it had I not been practicing those little pockets of mindfulness. So I kind of know they don't seem significant, and it's hard to believe that they make a difference. But I'm finding, 6, 7, 8 months into meditation that my mental state is almost unrecognizable to what it was even this time last year. Wow. And I put that down to meditation.
So I think that's amazing. I think it's so powerful. It's something that meditation that I've been really getting more and more involved in over the last 18 months. And I think I've found it to be a space where I can just allow all that mental noise just to sort of just be absorbed a little bit more. Not absorbed, just everything that's going on, just to calm down. And I love your illustration of walking past a plant and just accepting it and just appreciating it, just looking at it for what it is, sort of thing. And I was listening a little to Eckhart Tolle and his words on the power of now a little while ago. And there's something it just really resonates with me about what he was speaking about, because I think in a culture like ours that really just thrives on a little bit more and a little bit busy and earn a little bit more, and you can switch off later, but right now just keep on working. That sort of is the breeding ground for stress and anxiety and mental clutter, and just having that space to sit down, relax, and focus on an object or a breath or whatever it is. It just allows everything just to really calm down. So I was actually going to ask you about your daily routines, and I think this fits in really nicely with it. But is meditation something that's become a daily practice for you now?
Yeah, it has. I mean, there's an occasional day that I won't do it if I sleep in, or if I prefer to find the extra 15 minutes of sleep. But it's pretty vital to me, honestly. So I get up early in the morning and try and have a couple of hours before anyone else wakes up. It doesn't always happen that way, but so I get up, I have a shower, I get dressed, and then the first thing I do before I tap into any screen, any technology, anything like that, I meditate. I initially started just a silent meditation at 6 minutes. One of my friends said that 6 minutes is a great place to kind of begin, because it's closer to 10 than 5 minutes. And she said from there she personally then upped her practice to 12 minutes. And I found just in the last month or so I really feel like I need more. I think part of that is probably the fact that, if I'm honest, I'm busier than I have been just in terms of work, and I need kind of more time to decompress. And so it's the first thing that I do in the mornings. And it's the days that I don't do it, I do feel it.
Yeah.
I really do feel it. And I think, going back to something that you said a minute ago, it's just the act of just noticing your thoughts and not necessarily engaging with them, I think, is a skill that is something I've used over the past 12 months or so to really quiet that mental clutter and that constant striving for more. I can say I'm feeling anxious about this thing, and I can acknowledge it, but I don't have to actually engage with the anxiety. I don't need to make it any bigger than it is. I'm just saying, yep, hi anxiety, you're over there, I'm over here doing my thing. When it's time to engage with you and do something about it, I will. And that seems to help me a lot, in just a really practical sense, just to kind of give me that buffer between, noticing and diving into those feelings.
Yeah, that's a really powerful point you just made, and I think the reason it sort of sits so well with me is for up until a few years ago, I probably would have told you that I was a really anxious person, and maybe to a degree, by the definition that I was using back then, it's still something that I'm dealing with. But I think a lot of what I was referring to myself as being anxious about was actually just thoughts that I was connecting myself with. I didn't really understand this idea that I'm not necessarily my thoughts. I'm maybe just adding a little too much weight to the thoughts that I'm having. So meditation for me has been a beautiful space just to sit back and see those thoughts as something that's just playing across a screen. I've heard it explained. And watching your thoughts like a movie rather than getting on board your thoughts like they're a boat. And once you can make that difference, and I guess take that I don't know if it's a step, or to have that realization that you are not your thoughts necessarily, it becomes really powerful, and it's really freeing, because all of a sudden the things that bring you down or stress you out, you realize it's just something that's being portrayed to you. It's something that you're clinging to a little more than you maybe need to, and meditation allows you to take that step back. Have you found the same?
Absolutely. And it's sort of these stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And when you realize that they are stories, like they're narratives that we've constructed in our own minds for a whole host of reasons, and some of them are probably more steeped in truth than others, and some of them are more kind of aligned with things that we were told when we were younger, or, for whatever reason, we start to believe the fact that our thoughts are the truth, and I think when you realize that they're not, or not necessarily, it's, like you say, so freeing, and you're able to start shifting those thoughts and shifting the stories that we tell ourselves and challenging them and questioning them. And, I think I'm much the same as you. I, up until probably this year, would have said that I was incredibly anxious and incredibly, prone to being overwhelmed. And, even though I'd done all this work to not do that, I still felt like I was struggling against it. And this year, and I honestly can see that meditation was the turning point. But this year I've been able to just challenge those beliefs a lot more and start to not necessarily just give in to them. Say, I'm an anxious person, or I get overwhelmed. Oh, well, that's it, and to be able to question them is amazing. Like it genuinely is amazing. And it sounds so simple, but, when we actually put it into practice, it's quite literally life-changing sometimes.
Oh, you're so right, actually, Brooke. I don't know if you've ever heard of a guy called Thich Nhat Hanh.
Yes.
Oh, I'm a really big fan of Thich Nhat Hanh and his words. And just the other day, my wife Jessie and I were walking down Brick Lane in London, and we came across this nice little bookshop. And it had a section that was just dedicated to Thich Nhat Hanh. And he had these little 50-page books, and they were titled How to Walk, How to Sit, How to Eat. And I was like, wow, like if I didn't know his name, there's no way I would pick it up, because it sounded so boring. But I picked up the How to Eat book, and it was so much more, of course it was, than just how to eat. It was talking about how to eat a meal and enjoy it with your friends, and how to actually, taste the food and smell the food and see the food and enjoy the food and things. But it was really amazing, just the way that this message of how to eat just transitioned across into everyday life. And I think sometimes the speed that I know that I personally operate, but the culture around us operates, doesn't allow you to enjoy those simple pleasures. And I think anyone listening that's interested in it, I found a really great place to get started was the Headspace app. I'm not sure if you've used that.
I haven't used it much, but I mean, everyone that I know who has used it has loved it. It's for exactly the same reasons, yeah.
Was there any particular app that you used?
I use the Insight Timer app, mostly because I tried, and this is something I was actually thinking about this morning, I tried guided meditation for a month when we were doing one of our slow home experiments, and found that a lot of it was quite overwhelming to me to have someone sort of in my ears telling me how to slow down and what experiences I should be having in any given moment with meditation. So I found myself drawn a lot more to just the silent meditation. I'll have some bells every couple of minutes to bring me back in. And Insight Timer does both. So it has the guided meditations, some of which are really beautiful, and I have experimented with them. And then it also has just the option to set up your own silent meditation practice as well, which is what I use every morning. But I was going through a journal that I kept actually this morning when I was doing that experiment, and it reminded me of some of the really beautiful guided meditations that I'd done. And I think that's something that I'd like to explore more over the coming months.
Man, that's really interesting. So meditation's become, as you said, a pretty much daily practice in your life. What are some other practices that you have? Is there a daily routine that you sort of try and follow?
Yeah, I have a loose kind of rhythm to my days. I found that works for me, particularly I think because we both work from home, Ben and I, and we've got kids who are both at school. So we do have some sort of time boundaries, I guess, around that help split up our days. But first thing I like to do is get up early. And at the moment I'm working on a book, so I'm trying to get up at 4:30. Sometimes it's 5, but usually if I can get up at 4:30, I get up, I have a shower, I get dressed, I meditate, make a cup of tea, and I try to be at my desk by a bit after 5, between 5 and 5:30, and I'll write for an hour and a half usually. And then once everyone else starts to get up, I get up and we usually have breakfast together, and it's just a matter of getting everyone up and out and ready for the day. And I try. Sometimes I really feel like this is super boring for people to listen to. I don't know if it is or not.
I'm so interested right now. So if the audience feels anything like I do, we're all excited.
All right, I'll take your word for it. So like I usually try and have a rhythm to the way we run the household, and this has shifted quite a bit this year because Ben's now at home. Previous to this year, he was working in the city, and he would be gone at about 6 in the morning and get home at about 8 at night. So I had to be really on top of things at home, otherwise it all kind of fell into a heap. But I have, every morning I have a household task that I like to get done before the kids head off to school. It might be clean the kitchen, it might be clean the bathroom, it might be, change the linens, whatever it is. And so I'll do one of those in the morning and put on a load of laundry, and I like to have the house kind of picked up and tidy and ready to go before we drop the kids at school. And then I'll either do something at school, like I'll help out in the classroom for an hour or so, and then, it's back home to work pretty consistently through until 2:30 or so, and then on a good day I will take half an hour to sort of get my head into a different place before we go and get the kids from school, so that I can actually be present and not half in work mode, half in parenting mode when the kids come home from school.
Sorry, keep going.
Sorry. No, yeah, we kind of minimise afternoon activities as well. The kids do swimming lessons and one other activity a week, which is on the weekend. So our afternoons are really relaxed, which I'm so grateful for. The kids are able to play outside, and we might go for a walk or take the dog for a walk or go for a little bush walk or something like that, do homework if they need to. It's just really relaxed, and it's a nice kind of way to unfold and unwind in the afternoon. If we have to, Ben or I will work in the afternoons, and the other person will get dinner ready and all that kind of stuff. And, some nights we do a yoga class at the gym together, and the kids come down for that. And, we really sort of just let the afternoon unwind as it needs to. So I guess the first section of my day is fairly regimented, and then the afternoons are much more relaxed.
Yeah, beautiful. I really wanted to touch on what you just said a moment ago about trying to switch off a little more from the work that you've been doing about half an hour before you go and get the kids picked up from school. Jessie and I don't have kids yet, but I noticed that a lot of the time during the day I'll be working on whatever it is that I'm doing, and Jessie will get home from her job as a teacher. And if I've been working up until the moment she opens the door, there's a real, not a tension, but my mind's still in game mode. It's still in task mode. And it takes me, I just feel guilty for about 45 minutes while I'm trying to switch off from these ideas that I have or trying to save work. So is that something that you discovered the hard way? That, okay, if I'm going to actually be able to be present with my kids in the best way, I really need to just take a little bit of time to wind down before I go and see them?
Yeah, I think it's, and on the days that it doesn't work out that way, I can really feel the difference. It's quite noticeable. And it's like you said, it's not a tension between me and them, but it's just a tension mentally between where my brain has been for the last 4 or 5 hours to where it now needs and wants to be. And that it just doesn't just switch off, most of the time. It's not something that I can just, click my fingers and be in a different headspace. So, but Ben was actually the person who really brought my attention to that, because he was, like I said, he was working full-time in the city up until the beginning of this year, and he would always use the train trip home as his kind of decompression time. And he was always brilliant. When he came in the door, his head was with us, and he was always present with us. And that's because he had intentionally used either the train trip or the walk home as his time to kind of reset and flip the switch to to being at home kind of mode.
Yeah.
And so he was a brilliant example of how to do that really well. And I tried to have that in mind from the beginning of the year, and it's just a matter of figuring out how long I need and what that looks like in reality as well.
Is Ben the most relaxed guy in the world? Because I get the vibe that he is.
He's very relaxed. He's so relaxed.
Every time I feel stressed and I need to just relax, I put on a podcast and just listen to Ben's voice. He makes me feel more relaxed at a moment.
That's awesome. No, he's just things that ruffle my feathers. He's just like, really? Why are you stressing about that? It's not a big deal, And even when he is busy or he is stressed or he's had a full week, he's got an amazing sense of perspective, and always has. He's got such a good sense of humour and will make me laugh even when I don't want to because I'm stressed. He will just challenge me until I laugh, and he's brilliant at that.
That's cool. Brooke, for someone who's really interested in getting involved in simple living, or someone who might never have heard of it, I don't know if 3's too many, what are a couple of practical tips that you could give them as a start point just to slowing down the way they're operating?
I think I always suggest that people start by figuring out what's important to them, to really do some thinking about their why and why they want to slow down and what they stand to gain by doing that. And, to kind of really position it as what do I want my life to be about? And then what is it currently about now, and see where those points of disconnect are. Because I think asking those questions really brings into focus the areas of life where it's vastly different to what we actually want it to be like. And it's just so easy to continue to live reactively that way. If we continue to just do what needs doing immediately right now in front of us, then we're not going to ever be able to make those shifts, because as we said before, it's not easy. It might be straightforward, it might be simple, but it's certainly not easy to make those changes. And so I think that's a really important place to begin with. Just really question what life is about and what you want it to be about. And then I think, practically speaking, you can't go wrong by starting to deal with the physical environment that you live in, and start to just slowly remove those layers of stuff and excess. Because what happens as you do that, as you start to question the things that you've surrounded yourself with and why you've surrounded yourself with them, you start to really, I guess, clarify those priorities, those things that you first asked yourself about. And those priorities then become this rudder and this foundation point for you to build this life on. It's so much easier to go back to your why every time you have to have a difficult discussion with someone, or make a difficult decision about something to keep or something to let go of, or something to say yes to or something to say no to. If you can go back to those whys, those reasons, and ask yourself whether the decision is going to be in keeping with that, or it's going to take you further away from it, it acts as this really beautiful kind of touchstone of what's important. So, I think if you can combine those two things together, and they start to feed into this much clearer picture of the kind of life that you want to live. And something as simple as decluttering, which is such a mundane kind of word, but it is such a clarifying experience. So I think people's tendency is to go really big when they get that itchy kind of feeling, when you're like, I've got too much stuff, I just feel really antsy and I've got to do something about it. The tendency is to go really big. I'm going to go and clean out the entire garage today. And my advice is actually to go the opposite and go really, really small. Because I think, you'll find that, most people will find that going for those huge projects immediately will kind of lead them into overwhelm, and they start to lose sight of what it is that they're doing and why they're doing it, because they've got all this stuff everywhere and maybe they're not practiced at making those decisions yet. Whereas if you tackle something really tiny like, your handbag or your briefcase or one drawer in the kitchen or one shelf on the bookshelf or something really small, you start to practice what it is to question the things that you're keeping and why, and what you can do with them and what you want and how it, ties back into these priorities, and you start to slowly build those decision-making muscles, and it becomes much easier over time then to start doing the bigger things, and they don't feel so taxing or overwhelming. And so, I mean, that's based on my personal experience with simplifying and slowing down. I went to the physical stuff first. I know a lot of people who have gone about it in the complete opposite direction, and they've started practicing mindfulness and meditation first, and that has then bled into their physical environment over time. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong way. There's not a right or a wrong way to do it at all. But I think whatever you start with, just start really small and really intentionally, and watch it start to affect other areas of your life over time.
Something like the minimalist game that they have, I think it works. What is it? The first day of a month you throw out one item, then the second day you throw out two, and you work your way through 30 days of a month. I guess I don't know how slow we're talking with the transition that we take into getting rid of some of our stuff, but I found that a really helpful space. But I was on the other side of the spectrum where I just got too excited, and even though I was saying I was doing the minimalist game, I basically started at the end of the month just chucking out about 57 things. And then by the last day of the month, I said, but babe, I don't own anything anymore. Like, what am I going to do? So I'd really take your advice there. Start slow and just allow yourself to be able to make that transition right across.
We're actually quite stupidly decided to do the minimalist game in October, so what is it now, the 24th of October. So Ben and I have both been playing it, and we are struggling. Like, we literally don't own enough things to do it. But we wanted to kind of encourage people to do something like that, a daily small task that will help them simplify, but also kind of switch their mindset into this consistent action sort of mindset rather than one big leap occasionally. And we're really struggling just with the logistics of it.
Because you can't throw out your kids these days, can you?
Nope.
Before we wrap it up, I know you've got a book coming out in January, is it?
We're thinking it'll be more like April now, but it's sort of the first few months of the year next year. Yeah,
could you give us a rundown on what it's going to be about, where it is we could put in pre-orders and find it when it does come out?
Yeah, so I mean, the best place to keep an eye out will be the website or social media, but it's actually going to be a reworked version of my first book, which was Destination Simple. It was an ebook, and it centres on rituals and rhythms that you can apply daily to simplify your life. And it's actually not about stuff at all. It's more about mental and emotional kind of rituals and things that can kind of ground you in your day in such a way that they both help to bring you into the present, but also help you to create a more, or organized isn't the right word, it's more like a more orderly, rhythmic life. And there's 7 of those in the book.
That sounds so good. I'm definitely going to be getting my little pre-order in ASAP. I actually looked at it on Kindle last night and I realised you can put your pre-orders in now, can't you? So anyone who's interested, jump on board and get your little pre-orders in soon. But Brooke, I don't want to hold you up any longer, but just wanted to say that just so grateful that you stopped by and had a little chat and dropped some absolute bombs of wisdom, as I knew you would. I was excited that because even though it was 1:30 and I'm right next to my neighbour's window in a cupboard, I wasn't going to have to say much because I just have to ask a question and just listen. And I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. So yeah, super grateful that you stopped by and gave us a little bit of time.
Oh no, it was such a pleasure, and I'm just sorry that you had to be up at 1:30.
It's the ultimate sign of love. I reckon if anyone ever said that they did that for me, you know what, I'd be a big fan. So no pressure there.
I'm very flattered.
Awesome, Brooke. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, and good luck with the book release. I'd love to touch base with you again soon.
Sounds great.
Thanks for stopping by, guys. To listen, subscribe, and everything else, visit TysonPopplestone.com. I'll see you next week.